All right, we are recording.
Okay, thank you. So it is 2:30 on June 16th, 2025, and this is a meeting of the Land Use Review Board. My name is Janet Curley, I'm the chair. Let's start to my left, Brooke Finkelstein, board member present.
Sarah Had, board member present.
Alex Weinhagen, board member.
Kristen Felton, board member present. I
I
think
feel-
that's it.
I feel like I am most of the time,
Yeah,
so I
okay.
feel like it's.
Just checking. Do we have any updates to the agenda? Hearing none, we can move on to the main topic of today's meeting, which is the draft wood products manufacturers report. This meeting was specifically organized to hear public comment on the draft report. Is that Ed Bove I see?
It is indeed.
Who else do we have? Anybody? Elaine? The staffer. Oh, and Allison. So first, I'll ask if we have any public comment on the draft wood product manufacturers report. Ed, you don't have any comments on the report? Okay. Well, maybe, I shared a couple of comments with Kirsten this morning. You want to share those, Kirsten?
So the other thing, I guess just broadening, we could say we're on draft 3 is the latest version that's been available for over a week on the website. And that draft 2 had been revised in consideration of substantive comments received from FPR. Some staff input received informally from one of the members of the stakeholder group, and initial board input. And so that led us to the current draft 3. Just to mention, in follow-up to the last board discussion about this, I did reach out to legal to work out some potential refinement of the wording in the executive summary as it pertains to the Stony Brook reference. And I'm still working with legal on that, so I don't yet have that in place to come back with some recommended updated language. But as Janet has indicated, yes, she and I have corresponded about some other language elements. And one of them pertains to the use of the word dispositive, which is one of the rule recommendations considers looking at a possible update to Rule 19, which deals with presumptive permits and possibility of having some permits potentially serve as dispositive permits. And Janet, do you want to go through the,
So
just a rewording of that?
I figured since I wasn't entirely clear on what dispositive meant, that I should look it up. And I figure I don't know exactly what it means, that there are others that probably don't. And so it's probably a term that we should at least explain, if not,
Or avoid.
or avoid, yeah. And basically, it just means that it would resolve the matter of law that is under issue. So I had suggested, I was just looking at the executive summary this morning, and I kept meaning to bring this up, but I kept forgetting. In any case, I suggested that the wording change under number 4. Currently, it says update Act 250 Rule 19 so that presumptions reflect current relevant A&R permits and determine whether ancillary permits can be obtained after Act 250 permitting and whether ancillary permits may be dispositive. And so I suggested to Kirsten to change that. Sorry, let me just see exactly what I said. Oh, okay, I got it down.
Okay, great.
I suggested that instead of saying dispositive, that ancillary permits may satisfy any Act 250 criteria. So looking at whether any of those ancillary permits satisfy Act 250 criteria is what I think that means, right?
Or demonstrate, conformance with specific Act 250 criteria.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
The word dispositive, you know, you've interpreted it in my mind, correctly, because to my mind, that was the point. The, you know, the notion of, are some of the A and R permits sufficient to accomplish the Act 250 criteria that they pertain to? So what you're saying and the way you reworded it, I think is fine. But I think that the notion that it's dispositive is the point, whether or not those are or could be aligned in such a way that, you know, right now we have rebuttable presumptions that are still debatable. So the question is, could an underlying A&R permit be dispositive? So then it was not a debate after a rebuttable presumption was established. If I'm remembering correctly, it was to see how far could we get to a point at which it would be consistent enough to be reflective, and we could rely on the A&R permitting process instead of creating yet another showing in Act 250.
Yeah.
It would check the box.
Yeah. Do you wanna,
And I think we were talking about exploring that. Not promising, because it is, in my mind, they are not identical. And,
Right.
and that's the purpose of having a presumption that could be rebuttable, and, you know, in certain instances, they have been rebuttable. Because it's a little bit bigger picture, the Venn diagrams are not identical.
has this ever been explored before to see?
So, back in the teens, 2010s, I have, information that I know the NRC did some, research and collection of how often are rebuttable presumptions rebutted successfully. And we have, data from that time period, through, I want to say maybe 2018. I have to look back at the data. And I think that was one of the pieces of information that would be very useful in trying to figure out how often are these things, even in modern time now, not 10 years ago. Is the box typically checked and then 99% of the cases go forward? Or, so are we protecting and capturing the Act 250 criteria with the A&R?
Right, then I like the way you just said it.
So just to mention, during the stakeholder group meetings and as reflected in the current draft report, on the topic of Rule 19, there was a range of perspectives from supportive to concerned. The sort of asterisks on concerned corresponded, as I understand it, to this item, to the question of transitioning from a rebuttable presumption that what is considered debatable to something dispositive. And it was the term dispositive that was brought up during the, that's a possibility.
Which is certainly, yeah, the farthest extreme that in fact would basically make could make a criterion obsolete or so duplicative that it could be eliminated sense, or, you know, or it's more of a pro forma going.
Okay, so these A&R permits only establish presumptions to the extent they address a particular pollutant or emission. So the Act 250 criteria typically go beyond what the AR permit could establish. So I feel like, I think that's kind of a separate topic as far as like what's that gap. Yeah, but
So, in any case, an
So I-
explanation of the term, I think.
No, I think that, yeah, just saying just positive is that speak that does have significance. So I agree, the way that you restate it, that makes sense.
So there was that.
There's a point where are we going through document more so? Should we stop if there are other things along the way or?
Well, this was just the executive session that I had a couple of things. And it looks like we're
Executive
getting,
summary.
executive summary, sorry. And then under the list of 10, there's a sentence that, additional discussion in detail concerning these 10 recommendations is outlined in section 5. Section 6 provides discussion and details on several other ideas examined by the board, FPR, the stakeholders, and wood products manufacturers, but not currently recommended for action, and we had a period. And I felt that it would probably be a good idea to add by the board, recommendations by the board.
I agree.
Okay. And then finally, under number 8, Sarah, I was thinking about your reservation about this one. And, instead of advocate for funding a permit specialist or ombudsperson with regulatory expertise to work across agencies, adding or develop a user-friendly automated online service that provides cross-agency guidance to potential permit applicants.
I would be in favor of that. I was also going to point out under 8, when you explore more in depth outside of the executive summary in the report, you talk to an office or people as opposed to a person. So just making sure that you're
They
lining
were-
up,
Yeah,
those 2 areas.
okay.
But yes, I think that alternatives. I would like to endorse.
Okay. Everybody agreed with by the board.
Right.
So,
Back to this one for a minute. Exactly what were you suggesting? Because like North has their navigator thing. Are you saying something like that or? I mean, what programs-
something like that, that is more user friendly.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Oh, wow.
Something, yeah.
I think,
Not correct.
artificial intelligence is opening up a whole world of different possibilities that weren't around when they developed it. I think the Permit Navigator was perhaps a little bit ahead of its time, and there's a lot more technology now, which could be used along with human assistance, so you don't necessarily need a whole office for multiple people, but there could be an AI tool that helps, offer a more robust answer than the Permit Navigator, and then it's checked by a person or something of that nature. So
And it's easier to access.
different tools, yeah, just looking at, I think there will be concerns about hiring back people. And that the Permit Navigator was done for budgetary reasons and perhaps recognize physical constraints. And, I think regrowing the number of people might be something that will be met with, concerns. And I think if we can take a look at how the best we can use technology to ameliorate some of those concerns and still address the issues that are raised here.
Yeah, I had interpreted what you were suggesting to mean that it would be more user friendly to a broader range of people, because some of the information received is that it's has greater use for consultants or more sophisticated users, but is less effective for other monolith kind of general public users. Was that what you were thinking of?
Yeah.
Can you restate the language that you're in?
Well, I was gonna say, if this is an idea that is acceptable, I would maybe let Sarah and Kirsten work out the language. It's just something I threw in. And so it would add, or develop a user-friendly automated online service that provides equivalent cross-agency guidance to potential government applicants.
So here's my concern about it. I feel like that is outside the scope of the land use review board and acting it.
Right, we would just advocate for it, just like the
Funding.
the person.
As long as we're not, I mean, I just don't think we have the resources.
No, we're not developing it.
Okay.
No,
Gotcha.
we would advocate for the development. Yeah.
And I just didn't want to cross over into
Yeah,
AMR's territory in terms of how they want
yeah.
to, work, develop their own.
But
Or coordinate with us and everybody else across the state government that.
I think to recognize what Kirsten was saying is that as we look at a variety of these issues and appeals, this is coming up in other arenas too. So yes, more broadly, but more broadly looking at possible solutions rather than just adding positions. And seeing how best to try and, if we were able to leverage a position or advocate for, is that also advocating for the technology and support them? And I think that's just worth clarifying too, is in A, you say a person,
Right,
but then you get the plural later on.
Right.
So it's one of those, I think you should choose one to go with. I think the discussion of the board before was that one person alone probably could not serve well in addressing this, particularly that we are hearing this in other arenas such as state appeals. And so if we were to advocate for, it would be a larger solution than just one
one
position.
person.
Yeah, and the study committee also pointed to an office. What's the office, they called it, recognizing that it, needed to be one.
So, we can let Kirsten work out some wording on that. So it looks like we've gotten a few public, attendees since we started our discussion, one in the room here.
Hi, yeah, in orange, so you know who I am. Steve Hardy, Green Mountain Poster. President of the meeting.
And Steve, you have, comments on the draft study at this point? please?
In
Share.
specificity, no, I just wanted to just stop in and
Oh, okay.
add clarity from our position or something.
And then I thought I saw another online,
Yeah, we've had Jim and Annette join as well.
okay, Jim,
Yes.
okay, do Jim or Annette have any comments on the, wood products manufacturers draft report?
I'm just listening in.
Say that again, Jim?
Is
Oh,
it-
he's just listening, okay. And Annette, how about you?
I do not at this time. If I do, I'll send them to Kirsten, and I understand that it's time sensitive.
Okay, thanks. Any other thoughts on that report from anybody?
I have a few.
Okay,
But they're sort of wordsmithing, and I can just very quickly go through.
sure.
On page 2, at the top paragraph, second to last sentence, serving as district commissions, I think that as might want to be in on. But I'll let you,
Okay,
and I'll be a lot less specific with the others and just roughly go through on page 3. Right before the study methodology summary. Those 3 paragraphs, that last paragraph might want to be the first paragraph in the section. And then the second to last and the third to last might want to blah. And again,
so basically backwards in the way it is.
right, it's just, I think with this report, there's so much that you're unpacking that it's tough and you're just cramming so much in that it's just sort of like maybe just have a look at it, and maybe when you take a step back. It was also in that third to last paragraph, that last sentence seemed afflictive to me, but
Which paragraph?
the third to last paragraph under section 2.
Although the report was initially due.
No, it is in fact the legislative charge prescribes That's just so you sort of.
Oh, that sentence
Right.
on that first, or the last sentence on the first of the three.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then another area that I looked at is perhaps wanting some rewording was under section 4. Survey, which is A, the second paragraph. I thought that we might want to have a little bit of rewording. The first sentence starts with while, the second sentence starts with consequently. I think just maybe some retooling to make that a little bit of a stronger paragraph. I think in the next paragraph, the third paragraph under survey, where you say FPR and the board analyze the raw survey data. I think that might be worth explaining a little bit, Kirsten, about some of the background with that you went through with the FPR on that. Because it wasn't necessarily us as a board. I think that you did a lot of hands-on with it and the refining of it. So give yourself some credit where credit is due. I think in taking a look at some of what Brooke's compiling with the appeals and talking about her role in shepherding that project, you might want to add in some acknowledgement of how you shepherd this project within the report for the board.
I don't know I don't know that anybody else is gonna care. And whether it matters, we know that Kirsten worked her fanny off. But, and that it wasn't the entire board, but the report is the board's. And
Right, but we didn't process their data, their unrefined data. So I think when we're talking about how we've developed everything, I think we should decide and have uniformity, I guess, in terms of how we address things, because I think Brooke in putting together, I think you had some of the lawyers involved in law firms providing models. And I think you've been very good at citing them in terms of what they're have added to the process, and I just.
Yeah, I feel like there could be a little further explanation of exactly what occurred with compiling and analyzing the raw survey data before. It was fairly specific. And then it was ultimately FPR that provided the compilation that's included as an attachment, so.
is that exhibit A?
Stacy,
Yeah.
but I think it could be extended a little bit, as Sarah suggests,
Okay.
like, from my perspective.
And then I think just, that last paragraph, the conclusion paragraph, you can end it a little bit stronger. It's the whole conclusion. I think in some ways you put a lot of effort into the executive summary, maybe pulling some of that down. But ending it with also contemplated, I think I'd be a little more direct with, wrapping that up. Yeah, a bunch
By
of,
saying something like, we recommend statutory changes for logging bulk concentration areas.
there are a few different alsos that sort of string along towards the
Yeah.
end there. It might be good to just reword it and have it be something a little more direct. Don't want to choose words for you.
And then there was one other question, I can't remember, we didn't really, Kirsten and I discussed it briefly, but whether the, number 9 in the recommendations should actually not be in the recommendations, but whether it should be in the other section.
So about the farming.
The extend benefits to logging and forestry that are similar to those for farming, yeah. Because in the end, what is our recommendation on that? It's to study it and not allow it if it's a blanket exemption. I don't know.
I think that you're right, further in the report, we're more ambivalent about it and saying that you serve to Brooke's point too, there's only so much that we can do. And this is nothing that we can do, and it would have to stay further in, so it's a lot more ambivalent, not appropriate and more necessarily recommended.
So let me share, just one thing that Representative Mahali came to the appeals study stakeholder group last Thursday. And one of the things that he shared with us is it is most useful and helpful to the legislature when they request recommendations to have clear recommendations. And while it's helpful and he appreciates the studies that explain how you got there and this person thought that, this group thought that, and laying that information out, he cautioned us to not focus on that as much as being very clear and telling the legislature what we were recommending so that they have that clear message and act on it or, depending on what your recommendation is. So I do agree with being clear. I think number 9 should probably be dropped down to the other actions considered, because we don't want to send mixed signals. And we also, I feel like the recommended actions, to the extent that we have a task or a role in making those happen, we need to be held accountable to those. If we are empowered to go forward with them, if we're not now, that kind of thing. So maybe we should move 9 and tighten up our language a little bit to be clearer. Because if we sound ambivalent, I don't think that's going to help the legislature to make choices.
And along those lines, Brooke, for numbers 8 and 10, then I wonder if we want to say, instead of explore changes, to say recommend changes to active deregulation of log and bulk concentration yards, which would require legislative approval. For number 10, and well, I mean, that's the only one that required, that is recommending that the legislature do something. The rest are, we are offering to look and update and revise 4 of our rules. We're supportive of A&R, offering WPM permit coordination and support. And we intend to develop the fact sheet and do more training among staff. So there's only one really that is asking the legislature to make a change, that last one. And I guess the advocacy for funding something to help people with permit process across agencies is just, we will advocate for that. So
I don't think there's any problem leaving them there because.
Oh, no, I don't
it's a
either.
task that-
I just mean that maybe number 10, instead of explore, we should say recommend.
So the challenge is that we don't know all the details of what we would recommend.
Yeah, like we still have to develop the language
Yeah.
and the recommendation, the specific recommendation, not just say, oh, we want
Sort of like,
this, we want to actually say definition should be changed, or,
Right.
however we think is best. So are we up in the air and we can still create that statutory language to make a specific recommendation, or should we be saying, we're gonna work on this and give it to you?
right, I mean, that would be my thought. If we want to make that a more definitive, we recommend this occur. Right now, I'm interpreting that where there seems to be support from the board to make a recommendation, but it's still kind of conceptual, preliminary, and we need to refine the details.
So if we look at section 5, where we discuss that, there's the one solution is to remove log and pulp concentration yards from the wood products manufacturer definition.
Yep, that's the simplest option. That's what FPR had recommended.
And then what's the other one? It was to define a particular.
Under these circumstances,
Okay.
that would be recommended.
I mean, 10 could be draft changes to Active 50 regulation and submit to legislature for approval.
Well, no, they're draft statutory changes. not
Right.
effective.
But in the summary, draft changes to activity, so explore changes.
Yeah, we
Oh, yeah.
could follow up with it, so they would have it presumably by the time the legislature meeting, we could
Yeah.
file with that planned action.
Do we see any counter argument to just striking the language that was added? The simple number one option. I haven't heard any counter argument to that. I know that you certainly developed a more a way of approaching it that was trying to be more definitive and descriptive, I think.
Well, it was
You know,
just,
kind of redefine it.
it was just identifying some factors that the board might want to consider in terms of if these log concentration hours are to be reinstated as exempt, are exempt logging, that the board want to prescribe that occur, providing there's certain minimum separation from, say, the nearest home or area of frequent use, that kind of thing. So those were just, and then Sarah had mentioned size. It was just, it's just kind of an open, we haven't discussed it hardly, and it's just kind of an open-ended. If this occurs, does the board or does the board not want to prescribe that certain conditions be met in order for those log concentration yards to, again, be exempt as part of logging?
Why don't we say draft, develop, yeah, draft or develop a recommendation to the legislature.
Okay.
We can get that done before.
It's not next week.
All right.
So, I'm fine with that, talking about recommendation 10. I'd like to keep recommendation 9 right where it is. I think there is a distinction in the report between recommendation 9 that talks about extending what are already specific language for farming to forestry, and a similar recommendation that we did not recommend, which is to exempt forestry operations from any existing permit conditions under Act 250, and we didn't support that. But I think what was requested in number 9 still feels fine to me. And yeah, so in terms of the strength of the language, explore, draft, recommend, whatever, I don't really care, but I'd like to keep 9 as something that we recommend, as opposed to something we're not recommending.
So can I read you, though, what's in number 9, where the more substantive changes are right now? Because I think there's a little bit of a conflict between what I'm reading, which is extend benefits as already available for farming to logging and forestry is beyond the scope of wood products manufacturers report. The board has no objection to FPR or ANR requesting this change to Act 250 to help support the forest economy, provided that it would not encompass a blanket exemption that would potentially conflict with or invalidate existing Act 250 permit conditions or preclude future Act 250 permit conditions. So to me, after reading that, what I take away from it is we have ANR or FPR could explore that, but we have concerns about that exemption. That's nothing that we're promoting necessarily, given our concerns. I think if you're going to keep it, we should flush this out a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we were gonna be consistent with what the conversation that we just had, you're right, it would say, we recommend it, and we'll provide you some draft language to make it possible, such that we have some control over what that draft language
Right.
is.
Rather
to-
than leaving it to someone else
Right.
to
Yeah.
be something that we might object to.
Yeah, just, I mean, this section, you know, this came in late in the process in terms of consideration. So, you know, I think that the report writing was at a moment in time that, you know, as the conversation continued, I agree. And I think, look, this is Act 250. It's our law. We are in charge of administering it. And we've been asked by FPR. This is an issue that we have studied with the stakeholders to some extent towards the end, but So if we are going to move forward on this, and I think conceptually, as long as existing conditions of 250 permits are not in any way compromised or invaded, I certainly conceptually am supportive, and I think we should take the lead and say, this is how we want Act 2 to be changed to accommodate this request, not leave it. That's not doing our homework, that's leaving it to the
So-
legislature.
So I think just not removing this, but rewording it to indicate that the board will will draft recommendations or develop recommended language changes.
Yeah, and just, I agree, and so hopefully Kirsten get that.
Yeah,
And
looks like it.
I don't see us doing a lot of work on this.
Right.
I see us looking at the existing language for farming and using it. Because it references no permit amendment is required for farming that B will not conflict with any permit condition issued pursuant to this chapter. That's the assurance we
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
It's already in there for farming, so we just apply it to forestry and we're done. It gets the same allowance, along with A and the preamble. I don't think there's much work to be done here. I think, you know, recommendation is clear. We should recommend it, yeah.
And the clarity on the tree clearing, cutting, whatever that.
That
Activity
conversation.
or various activities are, making sure that we have clarity on that section. So this will give us an opportunity to, have time to do it right and make sure that it works from all perspectives.
Kirsten, do you feel like you've got a
Mhm.
handle on these changes? Any others from the board? This one? How about any further public comment from anywhere?
I get stuck with the tree cutting term,
Yeah,
because as a forester, I mean, we're cutting trees. But how it's in Act 250, they just it's just tree cutting, where forestry operations, because a lot of Act 250 projects have a lot of forest land that are within that. And they're very concerned with us talking with Fish and Wildlife. But, when we write up forest management plans that are approved by Forest and Parks, that seems to be two different people, which it is. But the people that are describing what we should be, or have an issue, are not licensed foresters. And I'm a licensed forester in 5 states. And, when people who don't have the qualifications are really kind of nitpicking what we're doing, or everything is just about fish and wildlife, where, you know, forestry doesn't seem to have this, to be on the same level as wildlife. And again, I'm talking about parcels that have quite a bit of land that is in Act 250, that people are putting into current use. But it's just a little laborious, and you have to, you know, make all these plans go through all these different. And that's what we're talking about trying to do, is streamline. Am I incorrect? So how are we trying to, you know, help forestry?
we're trying to help wood products manufacturers here.
But-
That's what our charge was with this particular report.
But they're
So-
both compatible.
Yes, they are. And I think the issue is that a landowner has the option or not to develop a property in a way that may require an Act 250 permit. And
Understood.
they then also may have current use. They may also then have a forest management plan. The Act 250 development may trigger the need perhaps for an area on the property that might have some limits in terms of tree cutting to meet the Act 250 criteria. So that landowner has entered that, that regulatory, our regulatory rubric. And that might be a consequence of that. It doesn't regulate forestry on the rest of the parcel. Just, it regulates tree cutting particularly in a particular area to protect a particular resource that Act 250 criterion indicate we need to look at.
Okay, but the thing is, with Act 250 permits, they seem to encompass the entire property, which they haven't. And is that really necessary on some of these large parcels where
Right.
the development is, on a quarter of the property?
Exactly,
But yet they have this blanket coverage over that.
right, and
That's why I
so
think
that's why,
this item we were just talking about is so important. Because it does seek to change that. It
Right.
seeks to say, just like farming, Act 250 permits and conditions, cannot apply beyond what the development, beyond
Right.
the development area of the project. I want forestry to have that same blessing,
right,
so that is less
Okay,
of an
well-
issue.
Yeah.
Again, I've been out in the woods.
Yeah.
A lot, so I'm just kind of jumping in this. I haven't given it as much attention as maybe I should. Another thing too is, with Act 250, it's been around for 50 years. And at the time, we didn't have an agency of natural resources. Now we have it. We have a lot of staffing to do all this other stuff. And I was thinking that, after the Act 250 anniversary, they might have kind of done more changes to Act 250 after 50 years. And from my perspective, it was pretty limited, the changes to the Act 250.
from the forester's perspective.
Well, from
Yeah.
the foresters and
Yeah,
from
and
the
so-
people, the owners,
You're
Yeah.
not alone.
I know
There
it.
are others that
Yeah.
felt the same way. that
Yeah.
It was not the full overhaul that,
And
Everybody-
get everybody
and
expected.
to the people of Vermont.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but that's part of what this number 9 recommendation is looking at, because as Alex said, is we would look at recommending a draft of a change to the law that would give forestry the same.
Great, if you guys would make that happen, again, I'm not the wordsmith, I'm
Right.
not an attorney.
And at this point, what we're saying is, once this report is delivered at the end of the month, we will look into developing the language. If this report doesn't have that language yet, we'll look at it further. As Brooke suggested, maybe by the next legislative session.
Thanks for that clarity.
Yeah.
For
So
me,
the other piece, that the board is doing is developing the fact sheet and supplemental guidance so that applicants for wood products and manufacturing projects are aware of this Stony Brook provision,
Mhm.
whereby an owner can specifically define a subset of the tract that would, be the land that supports the development, that is impacted by the commercial development. And then the balance of the land owned wouldn't be subject to like Act 250 amendment jurisdiction, have to return to Act 250
Yeah.
for changes unless the project was, would otherwise trigger in itself. So that's a that's, Stony Brook exists now, it's available. This will just ensure that wood products manufacturer applicants are aware of it and can look for that as a component of an application.
So that the rest of the property
Yeah.
wouldn't be triggered.
Great.
So, and that's a mechanism, as Kirsten just said, that's available now. It's just not well,
yeah, Stony Brook, it was what, 8 years ago?
oh no, it was longer than 24 years ago. Was it?
Yeah, but
No, it kind of goes with our thinking now as we're all aging, it's like.
It was just yesterday.
Yeah, right.
This one was just a few years.
Yeah, the exemption, the limitation that we're trying to protect in terms of just saying, sure, logging and forestry can happen anywhere. It's so that if there's a stream buffer, that, it's not a loophole for somebody to say, oh, well, that's my forestry plan, I cut all the way to the river, or if there is an aesthetic buffer.
But now there are laws dealing with buffers
Yeah,
in all of these things that we didn't have
right.
at the inception. So There's a lot of things that can string people up.
Yeah, so if the board is interested, I can give a very quick thumbnail on the T5 permit that was referenced in the the most recent FPR comments. I have the file, I took a quick look at it. Because I feel like some of these older permits that may establish ongoing requirements that do overlap with forestry, there are some possibilities where owners could return to Act 250 with updated information and maybe a master plan approach and just have a simpler overall circumstance looking ahead. But is there interest in knowing? So this was 1994, so the mid-1990s. And it was an owner who came to Act 250 to do a 5-lot subdivision, it's 5, of a large tract of in excess of 1,000 acres. And there was no identified planned development, which typically when an owner is subdividing, it might be like for a residential lot, or there's some information put forward to identify what the use of the lot will be and what all those impacts are. But in this case, in Eden, there was no specific use identified as part of the application. It was owned by a lumber company and it had been in forestry management. And it was done as a minor, there were some special conditions put forward resulting from comments filed from ANR around streams, wetlands, a critical habitat area that was Bear Scarred Beach Stand in one portion of the tract for which Fish and Wildlife had done a site visit. And so it was a combination of different people in ANR had evaluated the property. And because there were these identified resources, the commission said, when you undertake future construction, future logging, you will have to come back and amend the permit. And so that's what happened over time. There were a couple permit amendments for tree removal logging of certain lots. And there was also at least one amendment for a residential use of the property, a couple of house lots. And there is some more recent correspondence in the file from ANR to one owner saying, we would encourage you to come in with a master plan to reconcile. That issue was streams and inventorying, where are they on the land? How can we do this, looking ahead in a way that's sort of efficient? And there was early reference to some older AMPs that were in existence at the time. But I think it could be helpful if there's interest from the owner to come back to Act 250 with a master plan as suggested by ANR, or bringing forward the more recent AMPs, looking at this a little more holistically. So yeah, it originated in the mid-1990s. So that's that particular permit that was referenced in that.
And Kirsten, since you've been in the program for so long and served as a district coordinator, is it your sense that that sort of project and permit is something that is typical, or is the anomaly, the exception to the rule?
I would say it's not an anomaly, but it's very low occurrence of that particular kind of condition. If you were to word search under project description in the Act 250 database for the words forestry and logging, you would find of the, thousands and thousands of permits, you would find only, a limited, like small percentage of Act 250 permits that pertain to that particular kind of land use. So they're out there, but from my observation, and this is purely anecdotal, kind of my own sort of guesstimate, right? They're out there, but they're somewhat few and far between from my perspective. Yeah.
Good, because that scenario that you described in that permit sounds suboptimal. Both from the landowner's perspective of coming in without any sort of real idea of what the 5 lots were going to be used for, And from the standpoint of having to come back in at a later date and get a permanent amendment to law when if it's below 2,500 feet, the intention was that it's not supposed to need a permit. So
So I-
that sounds like an oddball, project.
Yes, and it is below, I checked that, it is all below 2,500. Yeah. And I'll mention, there was no hearing. My interpretation of the file is that the owner it appears the owner didn't want a hearing. A commissioner, there's some correspondence between the applicant and staff, and evidently, there had been a conditioned site visit, and there had been observation of erosion and water quality challenges occurring already on the property, and so that may have also been a factor. So that's just kind of a quick ad hoc synopsis of my big cloud.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think the notion is that the regulatory net is cast to try to develop those kinds of situations, projects, circumstances, that require attention in order to protect, our environment. Is it true that sometimes the net captures situations that are on the extreme or that people did not understand long ago, that this is how this plays out in jurisdiction and that kind of thing? I think so. I think this might be one of those examples. What stands in the way of, Act 250 jurisdiction sometimes is one lot in a certain time frame, right? And, we want to protect against speculative land development, et cetera. There are lots of good reasons, but I am not adverse to looking at situations and determining if Act 250 has caught situations that we can in some way correct, address, mitigate, because it was not intended that way. It makes no sense. And everyone shrugs their shoulders and says, well, that's the way it works. I think that we have an obligation to take a look at those things. Because this is sort of battling different notions. We want logging and forestry to be able to occur without those kinds of burdens financially and regulatorily. But we also want to be careful not to honor the integrity of permitting and the regulatory process. But I am absolutely, these are the kinds of things that I think the board should take note of and should really look at and determine what can we do to relieve these situations that should have been caught in that, or could be dealt with more effectively in other ways.
But please,
And also just when you think, just encouraging new, younger entrepreneurship to, build some of these, new mills, things like that. I'm from a mill family, it's just Osmo Lumber Company. You've ever heard of that?
That's true.
That's good. So I have intricate knowledge about that too. Growing up around the table. But all these ones are aging. They need, new people too who want to get involved. And that's always what happens. You get the big dogs, and then it creates opportunities for small operations to come along because the other larger ones are busy taking care of bigger projects. And we need the diversity of all these people. I know many small little mills around. They, things that they could do to put a structure over their portable mills and be a more viable business, but they're very reluctant to jump into the pool because they have, one of the things with the permitting is it's not a clear idea of what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take.
just to be clear too, what I was gonna add is, in terms of any individual Act 250 permit application or project, like we as the board it would, it's the regional commissions, the
Right.
9 around the state who ultimately, so for instance, if this District 5 owner wanted to submit an application for some kind of master plan findings or simplified path to advancing, future plans for that property, it would be that regional commission. that would
Right,
review
that's-
through. Yeah.
It's
Um,
yeah.
Yeah.
Very familiar with that.
Well, anything else from anybody on the draft wood products manufacturers report? I think that means we can move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I said this earlier in the process, and say again, and kudos to Kirsten for pulling this together. I think it's a wide range of possible solutions that are put together here in the executive summary. And that there will be overlap and be some combination of all of the above that will hopefully get at some of the issues that have been brought to us. And so, thank you.
All right. Ready to move to the next agenda item?
Yes.
All right. Discussion on communications and public outreach. Sarah?
May I share my screen?
Sure.
All right. There we go.
Can you zoom in?
Yes,
Thanks.
I can zoom in. Hang on. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. All right, this has been something the board's discussed about having a communications plan. I think it was with some of the first press releases announcing some of these different stakeholder groups, that we all sort of need a refresher on what's the process for that, how do we do this? And then it was, a lot of things that sort of came along with that, as long as we're discussing this. So what you see is a very first rough draft of a possible communications plan that assembles some of our existing practices as well as fills in a little bit with different areas. I want to recognize, first of all, and thank you, Pete, for helping me and Maddie and others with some of the existing processes and sort of dusting them off, I think particularly with the press release. But also I think there's an opportunity to use this to frame how we communicate internally versus externally. I think we can also use this to recognize some of our environmental justice obligations in terms of community engagement. And then in future years, we will be developing more robust community engagement plan, but this might suffice time being. I had some discussions with some of our staff. In some ways, this is moving sort of backwards, but this is part of building a plan, plan 2, where what you would really want to start with is a strategic plan, and then how you want to communicate out the goals and what you're trying to accomplish. So I put this together roughly, gave this to you bit in advance, hoping to get some general comments. Don't necessarily need to take them all now, but would love to hear rough thoughts on this, and I'm happy to take comments also offline edits, and just keep on plugging away at this in the background as we try and move through some other things. But the hope is by the end of the summer, before we start to actually evaluate regional planning commission plans, is that we have something that we can utilize to be more sort of unilateral with the way that we communicate out some of what we're doing. So happy to walk through this. I don't have a lot of time on the agenda for this, but I can.
Oh, yeah, we have an hour left to our meeting, so, I mean, at least, I can 20 minutes.
Quickly go through.
Okay.
And just, I think it's sort of good to have a purpose as to what we're trying to do. and how we're planning on doing it.
Actually, can you zoom in one more time?
Okay.
Or one more?
Yep. Hang on.
Bottom right will get you there, just the scroll bars there ahead to.
It was a little bit hidden by the, Teams panel. So let me see if I can get that.
Oh, there.
Yeah. It will,
You're good.
so let me just. Let me try that.
There, yeah.
Ooh,
There.
there, okay. Let me move my Teams thing. You don't get to see the Teams thing that pops right up over the middle of
Oh,
things.
right,
Okay.
right.
So just roughly what we're trying to do, and, trying to pay some homage in this too. In terms of, we have a lot of what governs what we do and how we do it in terms of communication, like the Public Records Act, Maine law, environmental justice. There's a lot more. I just wanted to hit the top highlights. And who are we trying to communicate to? Recognizing that we have our internal, we're trying to oftentimes communicate within as well as outside and looking to different agencies. We will have regional planning commissions, municipal governments, media, industry stakeholders. I think that's a lot of what we've been doing with our stakeholder meetings here. And then trying to come up with some that will look different for internal versus external guidelines about how things flow and what we try to do. I tried to, as I said, build off of the way that we have been operating right now, which is our executive director manages the day-to-day communications. Our chair often serves as that key point person for the board. And then recognizing not just board members, but our commissioners too, that are responsible for being kept informed and engaging. And how we do this, again, trying to take a look at all the different ways that we share out information internally, including our shared drive, SharePoint, memos, meetings, emails. And also taking time to recognize why we're doing this. Some of this is just employee engagement. Is making sure that as we embark on some of these new aspects to Act 250, the word is how we engage our employees and educate them, learn from them, and interact. I'll jump into external communication guidelines, which is a little bit more of what people traditionally think about with communication. And again, citing some of the things that are very important. I did get some questions about what is the Association of Public Participation Spectrum? And a lot of this for planners is, I'll mention Arnstein's ladder, that sort of idea of community engagement, which is very fundamental of how you engage and participate and empower the people that you're working with. And this is now sort of evolved. EPA has for community engagement reference this as being sort of the new gold standard. I'll come back to that. Stakeholder public participation, again, keeping track of who our external audiences are. I think that was something that was great when we first began. We had a list of a lot of our stakeholders, already pulled together. I think Kirsten brought it up that we have a lot of MOUs that we work with, different agencies, that govern how we interact and work with them. I think what we've been trying to do is this target outreach with major decisions or policy changes. And then this is a little bit of dipping into what could be and should be in the future years, a more robust public participation plan, but it captures that very basic of what you try and do in terms of inform, consult, involve, and empower. I also want to recognize, I think as I had some questions from you all in emails was, that empowerment piece is very tough in the situation that we're given, and that's something that we're going to need to think about. Recognizing how we're constrained. There will be opportunities for that, but in some ways that is sort of endemic of what we do in terms of the Act 250 process and engagement with community permitting process, in terms of that empowerment of, individuals. And it notes strategies for participation. Sorry, can't get it quite to fit, but, that the very basic is providing that information that's there that people can go look at. And then the second sort of stage is getting the information out to people and actually soliciting people with hearings, legal ads, working groups, moving into that sort of next tier of how you better encourage public participation is stakeholder groups such as what Kirsten and the Keels and Alex have all been working on, forums, workshops, that sort of direct participation. And then moving into, on the other end, we get more towards the empowerment is co-leading committees, going out there, engaging communities in having some of these meetings, as well as the stakeholders in those various different community roles. And some of this is sort of planning for the future, is there might be times in the future where this is something that we can utilize. I think we're at least utilizing the first 3 columns here. Different methods and tools for communication that we're utilizing right now, everything from the website to hearings, YouTube, recognizing that we do issue written decisions for correspondence, but that is not something that this communications policy governs. And that we also have a separate records request policy, which is much more detailed and pointing people to, yep, these are different forms of communication, but here are other places for a more detailed explanation. Some review and approval protocols, I think that's been something that's been utilized so far, is making sure that we have things that are proof checked before they go out and we coordinate, so we all know what's going out. There's some coordination to it, so we don't wind up at opposite ends in terms of messaging. Legislative testimonies and inquiries sought to include what our current memos is. There's been a lot of work done on this. There are different variations through this throughout the years, and recognizing that people, staff can go and testify as their own individuals. But when we go with our official Act 250 hat on, we should be cognizant of that and work together to make sure that we are saying things in unison and that we are factual and nonpartisan. How we provide things, how we conduct ourselves, and then also how we follow up to the questions that we don't know how to answer, and make sure that we have a uniform protocol with that, which I think is something we already in our existing policy doing. New section, handling complaints. This is something that as we've embarked upon our new positions, we, I think, had a lot of sort of talk about our image problem and sort of communicating out and misrepresentations of Act 250. And I think all of us have had different concerns voiced to us at different levels. How do we deal with those? And that there are different channels for that that we should be cognizant of, and make sure that if we are the recipient of those, that they go into one of these formal channels for consideration. And that also we acknowledge, we inform, and that perhaps annually we review what sort of concerns are being raised, and can evaluate on forward. And I think one of the things that I wanted to scroll right past it, but just that part of our, what I think is a culture too, is that that complaints are opportunities for organizational growth and improvement, and that these are things to be learned from. So trying to bring them positive. And then the rest is very, yep, we should make sure that we dust this plan off the shelf every so often, perhaps annually. and we should review update as soon as possible, if there are any changes. So try to keep it to a very basic, I think on page 5, 7, but really it's 505. Trying to keep it short and sweet for the time being, foundation. So, I'm going to stop sharing unless, so I can see people, unless anybody has anything you want me to go back to right now. All right, so share. So,
Thanks, Sarah. That was a good introductory. I think we can. I haven't had time to put thought into it yet. I don't know if there's thoughts to share now.
Sarah, I read it once. I need to read it again. And that reference to the international event, Sarah had kindly sent me some other related materials, and that seems very, my first read is like, great, thank you for all this. Yeah, let me know if I find time to read it again, I'll let you know.
And we have it on upcoming agendas.
yes,
So,
yeah. And yes, this was becoming the kitchen sink at different meetings. It's like, oh, let's add that to the communication plan. So I figured I'd get it dropped out before the kitchen sink overflows.
okay.
And I appreciate all the work that you've done. It's nice to have things organized and, the international, whatever it is, I will tell you, I tend to bristle at those things to like make a board subject to having to follow some set of rules or some whatever, just because it's fodder to, oh, you're not operating the way you said you were going to, this big long list of things you're supposed to do, you know, the kind of notion. I have no idea anything about these particular guidelines. That's my only sort of immediate like, what do they say? And do we want to like specify, oh, we're subject to this thing, or just extract the principles and express them the way that we would like to exercise? It sounded pretty robust and public engagement is always a challenge to make it real, make the public's voice really heard and considered and meaningful. And so I so appreciate the focus on that. That's always the biggest challenge is, are you governing according to the best interests of the public? How do you know that without hearing from them and making sure you get that? So this is really wonderful. That's my only caution is basically just a little spoiled.
Absolutely. And I think you just framed that very well in terms of what you said, and go back to the tape, but I think that what the idea is that you're transparent and you're providing information out to, this is loosely how we're going to try and operate. At the same time, it's that walking a fine line between trying to explain to everybody, like, here's what our goal is. But at the same time, particularly with public participation, you need to be so adaptive that you don't want to set in stone. You can reference and say that here's our intent. But I think that's one of the best things about public participation is when you are adaptive. And so you don't want to tie yourself down. So fine line to walk, but I think you just remember.
So I haven't had a chance to fully review it either, but some initial immediate reactions. Thank you, first of all, for helping frame it. Like, it's hard to even think about it until there's something to look at and poke holes in. So don't take my poking the holes as a criticism. It's more of like, thank you. Now let's, move on. So let's see the holes. In the internal communications, it seems to be very heavily dependent on the chair and the executive director managing those. And I don't think that's really the model that we are currently using. I think that each board member has different areas of responsibility and they do need to work with the executive director, each board member, but I don't know that the chair needs to be sort of in that loop for all of those internal communications. So that's one thing to think about. I think that the idea that we would respond to all complaints within 24 hours where feasible. But I'm learning that sometimes it requires some conversation internally to understand whether and how to respond to a complaint before you just even acknowledge it. So I might just suggest changing that to 48 hours, just to give us a little bit more time on our official document about when people should expect to hear back. And what was my other immediate reaction? Oh, so we have an interesting organizational structure in this, Active 50 program, where different entities have, are sort of have their own decision-making process, and like, as a board, we don't interface with the district commissions. And we certainly don't tell them how to rule on any particular permit applications that are in front of them. And we don't really interact with the district coordinators to tell them how to work with an applicant, right? That's a different level. And so it'd be kind of, I think it'd be fun, is that the right word? For the communication plan to recognize the sort of compartments and how we communicate between them and like what type of communications we have. Because I don't think even though they're somewhat separate, I don't think we want to assume that there is never going to be communication between, you know, a board member and a district commission chair, or, you know, another member of staff and a district coordinator. Like, I think there needs to be that level of cooperation and communication. So maybe there's a way we can talk about it a little bit in the plan, and recognize the uniqueness of our organization in that way.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing, is it's that balance, because, to what Brooke said in terms of being so specific elsewhere, recognizing that balance too, is how do you find that middle ground? I think in terms of the place of the chair, in terms of this formal internal communication, it really is designed to be, if we have like a more formal, like, let's say tier 3. We do formal rulemaking on it, it's gone through the process, we need to get that information out and educate our different district commissioners or different coordinators, is making sure that there's liaison somewhere between the board and staff. And so it's not necessarily designed to be heavy or chair centric, but more sort of making sure that we have those points of communication coordinated. But yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think this was meant to be general. You're right, we could be a lot more specific, and I'd welcome that maybe in the future. I think this is a good first starting point as we sort of learn, grow into this. Yeah, I'm not sure what form that would take either, but I'm absolutely love to go on discussion.
I get the balancing part of it, Sarah, and that I feel the same way with the specificity versus the genericness of a document, right? So to some extent, it has to be somewhat generic, but if it's too generic, not helpful. Like, it wasn't really worth doing, except that we had a nice conversation about it, but it doesn't actually guide anyone's actions or help them answer sticky questions for me. So I don't want it to be overly specific, don't get me wrong, but I do want to strike that balance and have some level of specificity, at least about like the kinds of communication issues that come up where we might end up chasing our tail. And we could avoid that by having, you know, a little sentence or two in the plan about that.
Maybe on, there might be a few descriptors, like if a board member were to get a telephone call from a person that says, hey, I just went to a hearing in the district commission last night. Such and such happened, and I think I wanna, do something about it, or whatever it might be. To have an automatic, all inquiries about pending cases are automatically referred to, that kind of thing, like it goes to the executive director, the responses of tasks along to the appropriate person kind of thing. Maybe just some specification of specific communications that we know we will get or we anticipate we'll get. Automatic, this is what you do with it. That might give a little bit more specificity, like Alex is looking at.
I think we have some of that into the legislative, so absolutely.
Actually, Brooke, you made me think about an overarching question about this communication plan. Who's it for? Is it just for the five of us? Is it for our organization? Is it for each and every staff person? What do you think, Sarah?
Organization.
Okay, so, yeah, we need to anticipate the kinds of communications that district tech would have, not just what I would have or Pete would have. And that sort of thing too. I don't know what that universe is, I'm just thinking, it just occurred to me that it's bigger.
And if we use this as a tool, there are some automatics. We need to make sure that we are a well-oiled machine in getting people that come to us, no matter who it is in our organization, to the right person. So we got a hearing, what district was it, on the coordinator? And this happens in the grocery store sometimes.
I'm wondering too, we also have this, internal staff structure where we have our legal team, we have the Pete and the coordinators, and we have our business director and tech. And, I don't know, how much the communications plan may need to acknowledge that. For instance, we talked early on about board members needed to rely on certain staff, that they should copy the supervisor of that staff if they're making requests. Maybe that should also end up in there.
Make Pete do all.
Yeah, and
No, he was great the other day.
Yeah, great colleagues too.
Help us fill in and because it was able to attend the appeals study. He made it all happen. That was great.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that as we codify a communications plan, we don't curtail the ability of individuals in the organization to talk to each other.
Mhm.
Just because we want to have protocol and the right chain of command and
Oh,
all
right.
that, we're still small enough that I think anybody within our 3 people should be able to pick up the phone and talk to anyone about anything, sort of, well, maybe not anything, but most things, and have a collegial conversation that a communications plan doesn't say, oh, no, there's a chain of command, you can't talk.
Right.
And there's a balance there,
Right, I
obviously.
think there's a difference between asking for that staff person's time and having a conversation
Right.
about the program and some other stuff.
And so I'd love to not only talk about this more as a board moving forward, and we do have it on the agendas. But I'd love to, I think I had some good success with, going to the all staff meeting for tier 1A, at some point, bring this to a staff meeting too. To get staff input to make this more robust, and then also bring it back to the board for some different reiterations. Again, I'd rather roll this out slow and get it late, rather than just rushing in. I think we already have some good sort of backstops for press releases now, as well as there's the legislative piece. But I think having something more thought out, to your point of, we all get stopped in a parking lot, or a grocery store and asked. We do, our staff does, our district commissioners, wanting to make sure that people are routed to get the correct information. And I think it can also sort of chip away at that, I've been calling it an image problem Act 250. I think also making sure that, we help move the needle forward, learn from it and improve the organization.
Thanks, Sarah. So moving on to operations, budget, and legislative updates.
That, I'll leave you guys alone.
Okay, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Steve.
Well,
Appreciate
thanks for
you being here.
sit in for just a few.
Yeah,
Thanks,
appreciate
thank
you
you.
here.
Take a snack to go.
Yeah, good.
Participation on the study too.
Oh, yes, I'll be following along. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anything?
I can give just quickly, legislature is back in town today. Your guess is how long they will be there, a day or two, probably, we'll see. Nothing is on the docket on anything related to our program that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean something couldn't come up somehow, sometime. But no indications that's gonna be the case, at this point.
Are you aware that whether they're talking about anything other than the education reform bill?
there was a couple of other things on the calendars, but again, nothing that was related to
Us.
us.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Surely other conversations are happening, but, not anything that I'm aware of or substantively for us. I don't anticipate actually, but what else? The only other thing I was gonna mention, we talked to Janet about this because it just came in, this morning, but there's an exemption for utility lines that occurred. This was part of Act 47. Weird snafu, they had two different sections of law that said, this is going to, sunset. And, they removed one of those, but they didn't remove the other one. So it is still set to sunset, in 2026, whereas there's another piece of legislation, currently on the books that says it goes until 2030. So kind of a mistake there, I think, from the legislature, and they will address that one way or the other.
But
Next year
not-
probably, and if they do that, it would probably have to be a retroactive. We'll have probably other conversations about this as that deadline comes closer and we know a little bit more about what people are thinking, but just wanted to put that on the radar. Talk to the district staff that have kind of utilized that more in the more recent term, just so that they're aware in case there's any communications or something coming out of their utility. But otherwise, there's really not anything to do on it right now. Just wanted to let you know about that.
Sorry, Pete, I
Yeah.
don't get it.
It's kind of, let me,
Well, I don't care about the sunset.
oh, okay.
What was the substance of what that was intending to do? Was it to exempt utility projects?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Sorry about that. I should have started with that. So Act 47 said, okay, there's this exemption for utilities, and the simple way to think about that is they've got utility lines running through the forest. Let's bring them out to the road lines. If you're doing that kind of project, you're not going to be going through Act 250 for that. You're making them more accessible, more resilient, et cetera, was the concept there.
Okay.
Okay,
Continue to work on the hiring process. There's a lot of little HR puzzle pieces along with that. Not a whole lot of update on that since last week we talked about it, but interworkings are happening there. And our budget manager is on
on
vacation.
vacation,
With
good
budget
for her.
updates.
So,
It's the end of the fiscal year, everything's frozen everywhere, anyway.
yeah.
There'll be no spending.
So studies and reports. Do you want to start on that?
Sure, we had our third stakeholder meeting last Thursday in this room. We had a big turnout and got a little hung up in the beginning on reviewing some statistics, which I'm going to clarify and correct. Thank you for pointing out. Our next meeting is the 23rd, and at the end of the meeting, A&R particularly was interested in what other processes is at the end of the, stakeholder having input situation. And I had indicated that we certainly have the public meetings already pre-scheduled in terms of later in the process and we are developing our report. But we felt it was best to get the next board meeting under our belt, see how that goes. We anticipate starting immediately with the NRC's board model so that we can, board comments about board models, so that we can get more into the components and the ideas about what kind of review on the record, whether de novo is still something that we're trying to work with. There are a lot of different ideas circulating. So we want to get the NRC's information on the table, have a more robust discussion about the basically the two board models that we're examining right now, see if there are any additional options that folks put on the table or refinements. And then determine at the end of that, towards the end of that meeting, where we're at and what to do next. And it's really going to depend on how this conversation unfolds. But like some input if the board has any in terms of, because I've been trying to anticipate what information will the board ultimately need. That's what we're really trying to focus on now through the stakeholder process. And the guiding light here has been, let's get some examples on, on the table where we can really discuss all of these components, how it would work, what kind of structures might be feasible. So that ultimately the board can sit down and consider either one of these prospects or a combination or hybrid. So I'm open it up to see what would be helpful from your folks' perspective to hear or see in the next stakeholder meeting besides marching through this last model.
I mean, yeah, I want to see the discussions on each of the models and have that summary of what people, thought of each.
I want a simple pros and cons. So if you're gonna, if the stakeholder group and you are gonna suggest several models, and there's been lots and lots of discussion about it, I would like it boiled down and served to me on a spoon that, says, here's model one, pros, cons. They're gonna be both, right? There's not gonna be one model that just does everything perfectly, and I don't, so I want to just see pros and cons of each, and I want I would like to get input on the existing system today in the same breath, right? I understand, we know it, but I think ultimately the charge from that report is to render some kind of a recommendation on whether to stick with it or move to a different model. So I want the stick with it version to have just a list of pros and cons as well. That'll help me sort of judge multiple ones in a simple way.
How many are there now?
What model?
Yeah.
So we have, one is an enhanced court model, well, we have the existing.
Yeah.
And then we have, Liam Murphy has put forth a model that is taking more jurisdiction
Right.
from civil.
Right, so
court
that's the
into
enhanced, that's what you're
environmental.
calling the
There,
enhanced.
so that
Okay.
it's like, all the environmental stuff plus the property issue.
Yeah,
Then, and that's his recommendation.
Yeah.
There is a possibility where, what he does is he gives just the Act 50 cases, permanent cases and JOs to the lawyer, and that goes up to the Supreme Court. But everything else would stay the same, or they do have an enhanced jurisdiction. So then we have David Mears's ALJ model. And that's administrative law judge model. And what it does is it has the board hearing cases from all three venues, Act 250 municipal and A&R. But it goes through an administrative law judge who makes the recommendation to either the secretary at A&R for the A&R cases or the municipal and the Act 250 comes to the lawyer on a recommendation of a hearing officer. To me, that sort of adds half a step, if you will, maybe not a full step. So we really have to talk a little bit more about that. That aspect of it is going to be discussed further when we get more into it. David Mears with, John Groveman with BNRC.
so we're on 3.
Yeah, is the third one, and he's come out with some, I would say, changes to the ALJ model. And maybe to simplify it a little bit. And part of the notion is, because, now we have 2 environmental court judges who have said we could use a third one if you want to go faster, but we always run up against due process as a tax fund. And on the other side, you would have a board of 5 members who could hear the big Costco cases. This is the other thing that yours is trying to distinguish complexity of cases and what kind of hearing process you would provide to them. So for example, a big Costco case, very sophisticated, complex case goes to a full board. The JOs or the minors that got turned into majors and maybe weren't majors, right, as they came in the door, might be a hearing panel with 3 board members. One of them being the hearing officer, or having one of our lawyers be the hearing officer of the panel to make evidentiary objections. If you have a de novo review process, for example. So what they're getting at is, or one of the further developments of this is to figure out of the resources that you have, the personnel that you have, i.e. lawyers as well as 5 board members with subject matter expertise. How do we configure a hearing? And so in other words, we would be sort of like the Supreme Court. And this, I'm really kind of going into model 4 now. We have a rocket docket and a regular, big cases get all 5 of the justices at the Supreme Court or at the lawyer. We have a rocket docket where you have 3 judge panels for the other cases that may not require as much robust hearing time or due process in terms of level of sophistication, of legal issues, et cetera. And these are important definitive.
So that is, so there are 4 months.
So, yeah, this
Okay.
is sort of the 4th one that's bubbling up now. I don't have it writing yet.
Okay.
So I have a question, and I'm signed up to help you on the 23rd. So I watched the whole 3-hour meeting, and perhaps that's why I have questions. I'd love to catch up with you after about defining an agenda for the 23rd, some clear outcomes and goals. And just some of the questions are, I think you have more than that, because I think there are, at that last meeting, you had ANR that brought forward an idea about on the record review for majors. So I think there are some different alternatives other than the one select few lawyers have presented, that are worthy of consideration. I think the other thing too is I really appreciated the level of detail that you went into for the last meeting, putting it on the web and also recording it to make it available. On the website, you have a lot of the different studies. And I'm sure you've probably done this at least internally for yourself, but I'd love to see a synthesis of the different previous historical reviews and some analysis of that too, because I think that would help frame it in terms of what Alex was saying about spoon feeding. I think that would be very helpful in terms of going through that history, because I think you had, I think it was Attorney Murphy that stated there's been a lot of thought put into our current model, and before you move away from it, some of that consideration is needed, and I think framing some of that history will be helpful to us in terms of understanding where we're at right now and the impact of changes. Do we have the previous meetings available that were recorded to? No, you don't. Okay, forget that idea.
Stakeholder,
Yeah,
just summaries.
yeah, but I think,
They're pretty exhaustive notes, so.
yes, and thank you to you and Alex, because I think you both tried, I read through, you have a lot. It seems like there's been a lot of the same content reviewed at each meeting. And so it might be nice to, with this meeting coming up, use it as where are we going to leave off? And have a clear goal, state of the meeting before we start in terms of, here's where we're at, here's where we want to get to by the end of the meeting. And here's what the path forward, and just being very transparent with everybody about how we're going to move forward to get to the November 15th now, is the new deadline.
We're in the 17th.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that's a Saturday.
Oh, fantastic. Lost a couple months there. But just, I think that would be helpful for everybody. I think it would be helpful too, for people to know, beyond the stakeholder group and some of those people in attendance, is can they submit other ideas for consideration? Is that something that board members can submit to you into the group for consideration? Other models?
absolutely, I've been inviting them. And I understand, there are, the lawyers that have been looking at this for 20 years or more each. But yeah, that's why, my feeling is, okay, we're at the fourth meeting, but in my mind, I appreciate so much the assistance in trying to, this is where we're at, this is where we're going to find that better, because it's been, an exchange of ideas and people have, spent time talking about things. The history of this, though, I have not wanted to get hung up on that, because they just did that 2 years ago and came to we cannot come to a consensus.
Right.
Half the people want the court, half the people want to go back to the board. And here's the other thing is that when this was changed to the court, we didn't have just the environmental board, there were 3 boards that we had the water resource board,
Land use board, or two.
yeah, and the biggest reason to change was because things were separated. You were having to go to more than one place for appeals, municipal versus active. Active 50 would go to the environmental board, municipal would go to the court. And so they were looking for a one-stop shop. That was that whole consolidation or coordination piece. And so what gave rise to going to the court was because it was piecemeal too much. So it's a little bit different situation now. We're just talking about which one-stop shop primarily. If there's going to be one, can the board function in that same innate capacity? But the other huge difference is that the environmental board were volunteers, like district commissioners are today. And so the construction through Act 21 of a board, of a professional board with varied backgrounds, experience, and knowledge, that's very, very different than what we had before. That's why it has been very useful to have David Mears weigh in on this. He has vast administrative law experience in other states. And he explained, we're very unique here in Vermont. Normally towns are not the entity that does zoning. It's on a countywide basis, much more sophisticated with professionals that administer all of that. And you don't go into the court system, you stay in an administrative, executive branch doing a quasi-judicial function or zoning or land use kinds of permitting. So there are tons of pros and cons of each of these systems. There was a really good reason to go to the environmental court and then the division to begin with. But here's the thing, we can put in, 2,000 pages of history here between Paul Gillies, explaining every single change that's ever happened to Act 250, we have a full chronology of that. And within that are all of the studies that have been every few years, pretty much, right from 1970 onward. Now, how are we going to change Act 250? What are we going to do? And this court board debate has gone on for a very long time. I think that there is, I have exhaustively looked at this, and it's like you just deja vu all over again. You keep reading the exact same thing. The amount of resources that have been devoted on this debate ad nauseum, honestly, I don't want to regurgitate that. I do not think it's necessary. I think the goal here is to find options that we can consider that make sense and are viable.
And also,
Pursuant to the planning that was done to look at this very thing.
you can frame it with what are the goals? And that was something, at least in that second meeting, that you spent time to distill from that group. And
There's like 5 things. If you really want to boil it down.
I think it would be helpful too, at least in terms of framing some of the histories. I think you had a couple of court cases that is sort of like, why did you choose those court cases? I think I'm talking to Kirsten, thank you for digging into the wood products of this one court case or one permit that Forest Parks and Rec was taking a look at and saying, you know, this is problematic, and this is a good, example of what the problem is. Were those cases examples of historic problems
Those
or,
were
you know, just for
particularly how, because we were asked
framing,
particularly
right.
to look at.
Those seem to be current ones, but not like, so I just, a little bit more framing, a little bit more detail about why you're looking at these things, and are they the norms, as you said, or are they the very few, or?
Outliers.
Right.
Yeah, because there is conversation about that as well. Yeah, it's gotten so much attention because these two particular cases kind of hit the press. I mean, it was serial, it was one down permitting the Virginia, probably against the entire time.
So I don't want to cut this
I'm
off,
sorry,
but I think, you two can, you know, do some planning before the next meeting. But I do want to move on because I want to get to the other.
Sure.
Okay,
No, I really do prefer to work with Sarah. So she
yeah.
can Get us more.
Is that okay,
So
Sarah?
Brooke and I have connected after the meeting, and she had benefited from some of my questions. I like the pros and cons.
Yeah. Is that okay? Okay.
Can I quickly just say that we also have, I guess we could talk about this at an agenda setting meeting, but if the board wants like, if you want to have more discussion, we have one more board meeting before the next stakeholder meeting. So if you want to talk about it in detail, there might be a little bit of space on the agenda on Thursday, for example, but you can defer a decision on that, but I'd be happy, Brooke, to, if I can be any help, if you want to help with like a pros and cons or any sort of legwork for that. If you go that route, happy to do that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Sarah, do you have anything on tier 1A you want to say today?
Just, hopefully by Friday, I'll get some more feedback. Thank you to some of you that have already provided me a little bit more feedback. That's fantastic. Looking forward to getting some more information hopefully by the end of the week.
Tier
Yeah, not much more to report from prior updates. We decided to slow it down a little bit to give the stakeholder group sort of a first look at a draft. And I'm stuck getting the first draft because I thought I could do some GIS analysis that I can't. So I'm meeting with Eric Engstrom, who's one of our GIS gurus, tomorrow morning to talk through the two analyses that I need done. So yeah, we'll hopefully know more by the end of the week. That's what I told the stakeholders, is that I hope to have some sort of a rough outline for them by the end of the week, but I need this GIS analysis to be able to do it. And yeah, that's the current status.
And what about HC stakeholder list?
Right. So yeah, haven't made any progress on that as of yet. But as I mentioned at prior meetings, my hope was to reach out to some, but maybe not all of the tier 3 stakeholders to gauge their interest in serving on the Criterion 8C. And Jenna, you sent me some really good suggestions on some additional people to reach out to. So still planning on doing that, but a little behind and haven't done it yet.
Okay.
By statute, we need to convene that stakeholder group, which in my mind just means identifying them and telling them when we anticipate, having the first meeting by July 1st. So we have just a couple weeks to figure it out.
And I don't have much either on regional plan. Sarah and I have worked through a set of guidelines that Erin, Rebecca, Maddie, and Alex and Rachel have all worked with us on, and Rebecca's taking one last sort of go through to put it in a final format, and then I was hoping to share it out. So it seems probably this week. be able to share that.
Exciting. You're also working on a draft application, comments, and
Yeah,
it's all coming together.
so a comment form for us and for partner agencies that is modeled on the checklist. Erin's been working on that. And, what was the other? thing? Oh, the application, yeah, an application form that would be used for all the different types of applications. Which, it turns out there's 7 potential types of applications. There's a pre-application, there's the regional plan review, the adopted regional plan, there's a minor map amendment, there's separate tier 1B requests, and then there's like a combination of separate tier 1B requests with a minor map amendment. So there's more than you think, and until you get into the.
And I've just so appreciated with the staff and with you, like going through and like all the words and like specific about like, when is an application received? Well, there's a specific meaning that's been developed around.
Right, so there are definitions.
Yes.
So it's not as simple, I'm sorry, it's never as simple as you want it to be, Alex.
No, it's not, you're right. I'll try not to cut through that Gordian knot later with a sword or some
Okay.
other sharp device. but
Okay,
Thank you
thanks.
for all that work. That sounds good.
Oh, I guess I should say that I am serving on a committee of the Environmental Justice Interagency Committee that is looking to select a GIS contractor to do the mapping work that the environmental justice law requires. So we just had our first meeting and we'll be looking at the responses to the RFP that they sent out earlier. And so, yeah. All right, any other,
I just want to put a little footnote on the wood products
Yeah.
report topic. So we hadn't discussed in detail FPR's second set of comments that are dated June 10th that pertain to draft number 2. And I was envisioning that on Thursday and possibly rolling into next Monday, we will take up, any and all kind of final comments, and I'll be working on some edits in follow-up to the conversation today. So,
and so Friday is the deadline for public comment,
right,
and so Monday would be hopefully,
everything.
yeah, everything. Okay, great, thanks. All right.
There's no board meeting scheduled for Monday, the 23rd.
Oh, that's
There's
right.
an
It's
appeal
next
study
Monday.
that day,
It's
so it'd
Thursday.
be the
Thank you,
26th.
Maddie.
26.
Yeah. Okay, I think we run through our agenda here. Anybody have anything else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Let's just we don't have any public anymore, right?
But Jim Hall is still on.
Oh,
Thank
Jim.
you. I just listened in. Have a great day.
okay, thank you. Okay, sorry, who
I'll
made that
second.
motion? Sarah, okay, and you seconded. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Guys,
All right, we are adjourned at 4:24. Thank you. Hey, everybody.